In this video, I show how to use the DGMD, the dataset generator for musical devices. This is the version designed to work with audio effect. So this is how the graphical user interface shows when you load for the first time. And this tool can be used to generate a dataset in a variety of modes that we will discuss later from audio effect. Now, there are two different types of audio effect that can be used with this tool: internal audio effect and external audio effect. So for simplicity, I will start first showing all the features using internal audio effects, so internal plugins like VST audio units, showing as many functionality as possible. And then in the final part of this video, then I will move and talk a little bit about how this can be used and which are the options available for interfacing external audio effect. So first of all, a few basic settings that we need to do. We need to define the audio interface that we are using for the input and for the output. When working with internal audio effect, it is important primarily to specify the output, because we may want to listen to something. And this is where we set the output audio effect. And we also want to specify which channel of this audio interface we use to listen to the audio. So where are our speakers or headphones connected? And we have it here. So the settings are already fine in my case. So speakers are connected to channel 1 and 2. And probably we want to enable the DSP in Max MSP. And as I mentioned before, we need to figure out, we need to set if you're using an internal audio effect or an external audio effect. And here is where we can specify this choice. So I will start working with internal plugins. And this is the section where we select the plugin. So on this drop-down menu, there are all the audio effects that are installed on my computer in my default folder. I'll select the matte filter in this case. But if you have audio unit or VST file elsewhere, you can also find it manually and load the file. So first of all, we can show the plugin. With this button, you can hide and show the graphical user interface of the plugin. Usually it opens up on the top left corner of the screen. And something that we need to bear in mind is that this tool uses the VST interface format to talk with the audio effect. Generally, the value of parameter that we see on the GUI and the name of parameters that we see on the GUI of a VST audio effect may not be the same used in the actual VST interface. For this reason, when you enable monitor plugin, on this section, you can see the name of the parameter that I'm changing and its value. So in this case, the frequency is called filter frec and resonance is called filter res. Not difficult to guess, I will say, but in some cases, the name on the actual VST interface and on the graphical user interface can be quite different. And it also works the other way around. So you can change the parameter through this interface. Now this one can be easily disabled, and let's start by selecting what we want to do. So there are different ways of generating a data set. The most, let's say the most traditional or the most common way is to, for example, select which parameter we want to vary when generating the data set. And in my case, I will select, for example, frequency, the resonance, and the overdrive distortion. And also select a minimum and a maximum for each value, a minimum and a maximum for each parameter, as well as a value for the step. So how many readings am I going to take across the entire range of this parameter? Remember that in the VST interface, all control parameters are values normalized within the range 0 to 1. So for example, as As you can see here, the first parameter, I can go and select, okay, I want to get the filter frequency, and I would like in my data set to start from a minimum of 0, a maximum of 1, and a step of 0.1, which means that the value that would be used in this case are 0, 0.1, 0.2, up to 1, so 11 different values. And yeah, this is something that we need to do for all the parameters that we want to include in our data set, and they have to be enabled. So I've enabled filter frequency, then I will select the filter resonance, I will enable it, and yeah, this is already in the filter drive, and I've enabled this as well. And now you can see that when I change values here, this value will be changed later automatically. The corresponding value change also on the GUI. For example, let's say that since this is a low-pass filter, I don't really want to start from 0, probably it's too low. So for example, I will start from 0.1. For the resonance, perhaps I do not want to go all the way to high resonance. Maybe that's a little bit too much, so I will stop at 0.9. And for example, for the distortion, I'm interested in the full range, but perhaps I would like to sample less value. So I will work with a step of 0.2. Step can be a value which can be extremely low. It can be set up to 10 to the power of minus 5. Now, we have selected the 3 parameters. And here we're working in the so-called step mode. That is the default mode when generating a data set. And what we need to do is also to select a file that we will use to stimulate this audio effect, and then we will record the output. And here is the section where this happens. So we can load an audio file. I will select this. It's not a great audio to be used as an input to generate a data set from an audio effect, but it works well in this case as an example. As you can see here, you have the duration displayed, and it's 1 second. And we can actually listen, we can loop the file. So as you can see now, the file is playing, and if I enable here, we can listen to this audio file. This is a stereo audio file, and yeah, perhaps I would like to analyze both left and right channel of the audio effect. So I want to select stereo. So I want to do a stereo analysis. And here you can see that this is the output that is coming out from the audio effect, and we can listen to this as well. Of course, there's very little coming out because of the frequency. And this is very handy because we can listen to the input, we can listen to the output, we can adjust the level to avoid clipping to happen, for example. This is the recording level, this is the level of the signal before being sent to the audio effect. And we can also play around a little bit with the various parameters. For example, we can decide, we can fine-tune the range of the various parameters, or for example, we can tweak the different values of the parameters to understand the actual range of interest when generating the data set. So now I can stop this. And we are almost ready for generating our first data set. First of all, we need to specify where to store the recorded file. And I'll select this folder, which is on my desktop. And all the files that are generated will have a specific name followed by number or an extension. And here we need to specify the name. So I will call it my dataset. Okay, and we're almost ready to start. I will not go through the more advanced option. First of all, you may want to get an idea about how long is this going to take, and in particular, the system will play back the input file and record the output for every single combination of these effect parameters. And the more parameters we have, the smaller the step or the so-called resolution, the more combination we will have. So by clicking this update, you get a number. And this is the total number of parameters combination that would be included in the dataset, which is quite high because we have, I think here we have 10 possible values, here we have 10 possible values, and here we have 6 possible values. So 6 by 10 by 10 is 100. For example, if we disable this, so this parameter is no longer included in the dataset. As you can see, we have only 100. So now to keep the generation fairly short, I will try to reduce the step. Perhaps we can keep this one to 0.8 and set this one to 0.2. For example, here starting from 0.2, 0.2 also for the step. And now we have only 25 different combination of the parameter. Okay, 75 in this case. And let's try to generate the dataset, and let's see also what happened to the actual audio effect and to this folder. And I will also enable the listening to the sound generated by the audio effect. Okay, as you may have noticed, there was a little bit of clipping. For example, if I have to use this dataset for, I don't know, some machine learning purpose, I will probably repeat the generation by reducing a little bit the volume here, especially when the resonance was high and the distortion was high and the level of the input was pretty high. There was some clipping, but for the time being, this is not very important. Let's have a look at what has been generated here. So this 75 different combination generated 75 different files from 1 to 75. So for example, if we open file, this is what has been recorded. And if we look at this dataset, .csv, it's a comma separated value file. So for example, it may be more convenient to open it with numbers, which contains all the combination of the parameters that has been generated. As you can see on the first row, which is row number 0, we don't really use index number 0 to index a combination of parameter. There are the numbers of the parameter. This happens only when we use internal VST because we know the parameter name. We haven't really used these parameters here, so the name here can be disregarded. These were disabled. And here you can see the values that have been the various combinations. So when we look at the recording number 10, this has been generated with a filter frequency equal to 1. Remember that that's a normalized value, so maximum, resonance equal to 2, and drive equal to 0. Now, this CSV gets generated automatically when the dataset generation ends. But, for example, if I delete it, and if I change something, for example, I decide here to go with a step of 0.25, which means we will have more combination. The combination of these parameters is actually generated in a table that is in the memory, is a memory table within the tool. It gets generated as soon as we click on update. So even before, only for the step mode, even before running the analysis, I can write the parameter in the CSV file. Now we need to remember that this is no longer the CSV that we used for generating the data set, so we should delete all the files. And as you can see now, for the filter drive, we also have 0.25 as a value, and there are more combinations. Okay, we can clean this up. At least we can clean some of the files. And let's have a look at some of the advanced options. Now, as you notice, during the process of generating the dataset, a new combination is sent to the audio effect, and then the playback of the audio input start, and the output gets recorded, and this process continue again and again and again. Now, here there is a parameter that allow you to define a delay between sending a new combination to the audio effect and starting the recording of the playback. Now, for internal audio effect, for internal plugin, this number is automatically set to a minimum that we recommend based on the signal vector size that you define in Max. But in general, it can be very difficult to predict or to know how long it's going to take to update a parameter on an external audio effect. So this is a number that a user should try to estimate and set to a reasonable value. For example, now I will try to increase this by a little bit. Let's set it to, I don't know, 200 milliseconds. And when I generate the data set, you will actually hear a little bit of waiting time before starting the new playback of the file. And we can interrupt the dataset generation at any point. And as you notice now, there was a little bit of waiting. Another important feature is that, as you may have noticed, generating a dataset can be very time consuming. If you have many parameters and if you have a very high resolution, I mean, very small step, there can be hundreds of thousands of combinations. And generally, the input file is not going to be, it depends what is the goal of generating the dataset, but if you're doing machine learning modeling of audio effect, the duration of the audio stimulus of the audio input will be way longer than 1 second. So it can take quite a lot of time. For example, in this case, the estimation would be that with 1 second, since the duration of the audio input file is 1 second, it will take 1 second multiplied 125 times to generate the data set, so roughly a couple of minutes. If you do not manage to run, for various reasons, if you do not manage to generate the entire data set within a single, let's call it session, it is possible to continue generating the data set over multiple sessions. So first of all, once you are happy with all your settings here, what I recommend you to do is to save your settings in a preset. My first data set. And you'll save it as, I'm saving this as preset number 1, so I will store it. And as you can see now, this square, it's light blue, no longer white, so it means that the preset number 1 has been stored. And this number can be changed with the mouse going up and down. And for example, next time you open this interface, you can recall preset number 1. If you do not want to lose all your presets, you can also export the collection of presets to a file and eventually reload the whole collection of presets from a file. So after you reopen the interface and you reload your presets, and then you notice, okay, previously I have interrupted the data generation at yeah, 7% at number 9. So you can decide next time to start at number 10. And this will continue from where we left it before. Generally, audio effect may determine a latency. They may present a latency between the input audio signal and the output audio signal. They may present what I can call an intrinsic latency, so their own latency. But when we integrate an audio effect into this environment, which is max MSP, or when we interface an audio effect through an audio interface, there may be other factor determining a latency between the input signal that we send to the audio effect and what we are recording. So in the case of internal plugins, generally it's the signal vector size that determine a latency, while it's the I/O audio interface buffer size that determine an additional latency when we use external audio effect. So in this case, for example, what we can see is that when we, for example, if we try to record once again for example, we can go through the parameters in step mode, and we can try to record. Okay. We can actually see that the recording there is a little bit of latency, especially here on the left channel where we have the attack of this synthesized pluck string. We have it in forward on the left channel and backward on the right channel. And if we compare this with the input that we are using, we can see that here there is no latency. So the attack, it's right at the beginning of the file. So this one can be a problem in some cases. So maybe an undesired aspect of the dataset having latency, especially latency that is introduced by the recording setup. So what we have designed and provided here, it's the possibility to measure the latency. So to measure the latency, it is important to set the parameter of the effect in a certain configuration that give us the driest possible signal. In our case, the cutoff frequency of the low pass filter as open as possible, so to the maximum, minimum resonance and minimum distortion. And then we can measure the latency. And as you can see, the latency match the signal vector size. Now, if we enable latency compensation, what will happen is that the recording process will be carried out not only for the duration of the audio input file, not only for 1 second, but for 1 second plus the detected latency. So it's going to be 1 second at 48 kilohertz, so 48,000 samples plus 64 samples. So the recording will be a little bit longer. And right after the recording end, before writing the recorded signal from a buffer to a file, the first 64 samples, so the first number of sample according to the detected latency will be cropped from the very beginning of the file. So we can try to generate the recording once again. And in this case, for example, if we open number 6, you can see that there is no longer 64 sample of silence due to the delay at the very beginning. And the overall duration of the recording is still exactly 1 second. There are different ways of generating the dataset with respect to changing the parameter. So the next one is random mode. So in random mode, you still need to select which parameter you want to, of course, change and vary within the generation of the dataset. You can still specify the minimum, the maximum for each parameter. But then we no longer go through all the possible combination. You need to manually specify how many combination you're interested in. For example, let's say just 10, just to make this as quick as possible. And in this case, the value for this parameter will be drawn from a uniform distribution within the maximum and the minimum. In this case, the step will act as a quantizer. What does it mean? It means that if I leave here step equal to 0.2, the only values that I can draw from this distribution are actually 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, and 1. But if we set it to a very small number, this is no longer going to be the case. So we can draw basically, in theory, any real valued number within the maximum and the minimum. So we can give a try. I will delete also the dataset.csv. In this case, it is not possible to predict which random parameter combination will be generated, so the CSV file can be generated only at the very end. And as you see, when the generation ends, we got the CSV file with the random value of the parameters. Now, if you accidentally delete this file, the random generated combination are still in memory. You can write it once again, but if you click reset, everything is gone from memory. Also, in this case, it's possible to start from a higher index, but in this case, this will just determine that the first, if I set this, for example, to 11, it will just, let's say 11, it will just determine, you cannot start, yeah, of course I cannot start from 11 if I have 10 total combination. So if I set it to 11, it will simply determine that the first file that will be recorded will have an index equal to 11, and another dataset.csv will be generated. So perhaps I want to preserve the old one, and then I want to continue generating more random combination, which would be associated with a new dataset.csv file, and then you have to manually merge the two files. Another option for generating the dataset is to go totally manual. Let's delete everything here. This can be very handy when you're not happy with random parameters, you're not happy with uniformly sampling through the minimum and maximum using a given step, and when you're not happy even with another option, which we call sweep, that we'll cover later, and you want to manually define the parameters. So this can be done. You have to manually adjust the parameter to the value that you want, and in this case we no longer have total combination and so on, so you just generate, and every time you click on generate, a new file will be recorded. Then I adjust my parameter again, and this will happen again and again until I decide to write the parameter. This one can be particularly handy when we have an external audio effect, which parameter cannot be controlled through MIDI or through control voltages. So you really have to tweak those parameters manually, but then you can use this interface to keep track of the values that you're setting, and also to use this tool to send and record audio using an external audio interface. Now, the third way of changing the parameter, it's called sweep. So in this case, the parameters are no longer fixed to a specific combination during the recording of the output of the audio effect, that they will change continuously. Now, as you can see that here the parameters have started to move. They're driven by a triangular wave, and this wave drive the parameter from the maximum to the minimum. So for example, here, if I set the maximum to 0.5, you will see that this one stops at 0.5. The sweep in this case, the step in this case has no meaning, but we have the sweep rate, which determine how fast this parameter do up and down. Generally, I mean, it depends on the application, whether you want to sweep this parameter fairly slowly, or if you want to do it a little bit more fast. And if you want to make sure that over time, this triangular wave sweeping the parameter cover a good range, I mean, a good combination, a variety of combination of these parameters, it is recommended to use frequencies which are not in integer multiple relationship or identical. Now, in this case, the concept of combination no longer holds, but we call it repetition. So now the data set will be recorded for a user-defined repetition of the audio file. So this file will be looped for a certain number of times, so let's say 10 times. And the output will be recorded continuously, and also these parameters will be recorded continuously, and in particular they will be recorded in a multi-channel audio file. The parameter will not be stored in CSV file anymore. Now, if we are controlling, let's say, parameters of an audio effect, which is an analog audio effect, with a CV control voltage interface driven by audio signal, it is reasonable to think about the variable control parameters as continuous signals, so audio signals. But if you're driving a VST or if you're driving an external audio effect with a MIDI interface, we do not really feed control parameters as audio signals, but as messages over a digital interface. Therefore, we also need to decide how often we sample this triangular waveform to send an updated value to the audio effect. And by default, this value is set to 2048 sample. For example, if you set it to something lower, you will see that this triangular waveform appears a little bit more smooth, or if we go for much higher number, it will result a little bit more steppy. So this one depends also on the specific effect that we are controlling and how often we want to send an update value for the parameter. I guess that if we're using an audio effect and if we have a signal vector size of 64, which means that blocks of 64 samples are processed at once, this number should not be lower than 64. So for example, let's try to set it to the double, 128. Now let's try to generate the data set, and we're still going to be listening to the audio output. Okay, as you can see here, I will stop the DSP so the parameters stop going up and down. As you can see here, we have 10 files that are generated as the number of repetition, and we have the recording of the output as we had before, dataset number 5, but then for number 5 we also have the recording of the parameters. And in this case, since we enable only 3 parameters, here we have 3 separate tracks for the parameters. And if we further analyze these values, you will see that at some point you will notice the steppiness of the response, although it's quite difficult to see it here, simply because we are in reality, we are updating the parameters only after 128 samples. So it will result a little bit step, although I believe it's possible to see here that there are actual steps. So this is what it's generated. So we have a number of files equal to the number of repetition that we have set. And for each file, each file recording the output of the audio effect, we have another audio file with the same number, with the text sweep at the end, which contains the recording of the audio effect. Now, if we enable more parameters, for example, if we enable the whole set of 10 parameters, there will be 10 channels on this audio recording, but in this case, there were only 3. For example, if you enable also parameter 5, but you skip 4, there's still gonna be 5 channels on the recorded sweep multi-channel audio file. Although this one, parameter 4, because disabled, will be stuck at 0 in terms of value. The latency compensation works also in this case. It's exactly as before. If this is enabled, the recording will be a little bit longer and then will be cropped before being stored to a file. And this one instead, it works a little bit different. The delay after the update, if you recognize that it takes a little bit of time for the audio effect to actually digest the new parameters and generate an output accordingly, you can specify this value and you can increase it, I don't know, to a 10 milliseconds. But in this case, the effect of this delay after update will be very different. In this case, what's going to happen, it's going to introduce a delay in the recorded output of the audio effect. So parameters are sent, but the recorded audio, it's going to be delayed by a number of milliseconds that is specified over here. Other functionalities that we include is, of course, working with external audio effect, and in this case, the name of the parameters here disappear because we are not working with the VST anymore. We still have the same options for the different analysis mode, but now we need to understand how we can interconnect external audio effects. So first of all, and perhaps we can look at this illustration. So let's start from an example in which we try to record the dataset from this Zoom Studio 1204 effect unit, and we need to use an external audio interface. This is a stereo effect, so perhaps we want to record it in stereo. So what we need to do, first of all, it's to let's make some drawing. We need to connect the output of our sound card to the input of our sound card. So for example, we can take, I believe, yes, this is the input. So you want to connect the output 1 and 2 to the input 1 and 2, and then the output of the audio effect to the input of the sound card. And this is fairly straightforward. Now, this effect has a MIDI interface. So for each preset, preset can also be changed by MIDI, but in general, there are 2 parameters controlling the processing, the sound alteration of each preset of each audio effect. And these 2 parameters can be controlled by MIDI. So we can actually take the MIDI output of the audio interface and connect it to the MIDI input of the audio effect. And in this case, for example, 60 control change number 85 and 86 allow to control parameters 1 and 2. So how does it work this on the interface? So first of all, let's look at the audio connection. So we need to select the appropriate audio interface. We're still perhaps going to be using, I don't know, channel. In this case, we have selected channel 1 and 2 to send the audio to the audio interface. So let's say that channel 1 and 2 will be used for sending the audio to the audio effect, and perhaps I will connect my speakers to 3 and 4 in case I still want to listen to the audio. And for the inputs, I believe that we have selected also channels 1 and 2. So we need to configure which audio channels are used to send audio to the audio effect and which channels are used to receive back the audio from the audio effect. Now for sending the parameters, in this case we need to select the appropriate audio interface, which is not connected at the moment. You want to enable, you want to select the channel, and this effect unit can receive on any channel, so I will assume that is channel number 1. Now here we need to specify the MIDI output CC for the two parameter of the effect, so which is called edit 1 and edit 2, which are 85 and 86. So 85 and 86. Now something that we need to keep in mind, and is very important in this context, is that this is a MIDI interface, and the resolution of MIDI it's 7 bits. So when we send control change values, we send numbers ranging from 0 to 127. And of course, the MIDI output of this tool is quantized to those values. So using a step value, which is too little, too low, won't really be meaningful or not even appropriate. So what I usually, and this is also recommended up here, so if you're using MIDI, you should not use a step value lower than 1 divided 128, which is 0.078125. 0.078125. So this is actually the minimum that you should use. And if you want to use a larger step value, the recommendation is always to use integer multiple of this quantity. So remember that this quantity is 1 divided 128. If you want to use a larger step, you can use 2 divided 128, 3 divided 128, 4 divided 128. And this is appropriate because you will actually, because this parameter ranging from 0 to 1, which is a continuous range, will be mapped exactly to the MIDI, to the actual MIDI values. So this is the way we work with an external audio effect that is driven by MIDI, but we may have different type of audio effect which are not controlled by MIDI. So for example, let's look at this other example in which, for example, we have a neutron, which is a semi-modular synthesizer, which also present, let's call it audio effects. So for example, there is a filter, there is an overdrive, there is a delay, which we can somehow isolate using patching points. So perhaps we can think to use a different type of sound card. For example, this is a sound card with DC coupled input and output. So input and output can be used for audio signal, but also for receiving and sending control voltages. And we can think about isolating the filter. So for example, this is the input of the filter up here. And these are two inputs that we can use to control the frequency and resonance of the filter. So if we want to create a data set from the filter of the neutron, for example, we can use an output number 1 will send the testing signal, and then we can use output number 2 to send the CV for the filter frequency, and output number 3 for sending the resonance. Then of course we need to make sure that the rest of the neutron doesn't really alter the sound. So you want to set no delay, no overdrive, and we need to record the output. So we can take the output of the whole chain and we can connect it to input number 1. Now, how to set this options in the tool? I mean, this is fairly easy. So the proper sound card needs to be used. I will stick to, let's say for the speakers now, probably I want to select, I don't know, 5 and 6, 4 and 5, for example. Now let's start from the output. I'm using output number 1 to set, and in this case I'll set it to mono because this is a mono system. So I will select output number 1 to send the sound to the device. So this is number 1. I'm not using right channel, so this number can be set to 0, or you can leave it as it is. And I'm also using channel number 1 to get the output back into the tool that is recording. So to device number 1 from device channel number 1. Speakers can be set, I don't know, 3 and 4. We can put it back to as it was before. But in this case, we need to remember that we're using output number 2 and output number 3 of the sound card for driving the parameter. And this is where we do this change. So output number 2 and output number 3. And in this case, we have only 2 parameters. Doesn't really matter. We can also leave the MIDI-CC to whatever it was. We need to make sure that in this case, we enable the CV output. You also need to understand whether these control parameters take a unipolar or bipolar control voltage, so whether it's only positive voltage or negative and positive. In this case, it's unipolar, so I'll leave it to unipolar, and then the tool works as discussed before. You can measure the latency, you can listen to the, you can preview the audio that is being filtered by the system and so on. So pretty much the same option that we covered before. A final consideration when using the sweep mode. So as we discussed before, the parameters are recorded into audio files, and by default, these audio files are, each sample is represented by a 24-bit number, while for the audio recording, here we use 32-bit floating point representation for each audio sample. Now, if, for example, if we are sweeping parameters, but these parameters control MIDI, a MIDI interface, so we are controlling, for example, the parameter of the Zoom Studio, probably is not appropriate to consider those values as, since the step in sweep doesn't really have an effect, it's not appropriate to consider 24 bits for the sweeping triangular wave, so probably you want to set this one to 7. The audio files will still be generated with 24 bits per audio samples, but prior to recording, we are quantizing this triangular wave to 7 bits. So, and this one can also be the case when working with external effect with a CV interface, but perhaps you know that those are not really real analog effect. There is a digital interface in the middle that is somehow sampling the CV signals with, I don't know, 10-bit ADC, and in that case, probably you want to set that one to 10. So this is something to keep in mind to have a good consistency between the data set that we're recording and the effect that we're using to generate the data set. In the audio input source setting section, there is a button called Loopback. When we use this button, and I will explain you next for which purpose we want to use it. When we use this button, we'll use it only in the case we are generating a dataset from an external audio effect. So there is an audio interface in the middle. You want to take the audio interface and you want to close the output of the audio interface to the input. So you connect the output directly to the input, bypassing the audio effect. Once you have created this connection, you can press the Loopback button. And what will happen is that the sound will be played back and it will be recorded back from the audio interface itself. And it will be, and you'll find a separated file in your output folder called loopback.wave. Now, if you think about the process of modeling an audio effect using this dataset, on one side you have a sound source file that perhaps you have generated synthetically, and then you have recordings of an audio effect. But the recordings of the audio effect for an external audio effect have been also somehow processed. They've passed through the audio interface twice. They've passed through the ADC and then the DAC of the audio interface. So it may not be, although most audio interfaces are somehow transparent, it could be fair also to process what you will use later in a machine learning modeling task. It would be fair also to process the audio input source file through the same pipeline, through the same signal path that we have also used to record the output of the audio effect, which means let this signal pass through the sound card twice, the ADC and then the ADC, and record it back, and then use this generated loopback file as your actual input for a machine learning model that you use to model that you use with the dataset, with the generated data sets to model the audio effect.